So you want to buy a private island, your own beach, your own rules, nobody else's footprints in the sand. Here's the part nobody tells you. Most private islands don't make their owners a single dollar. Many of them cost more to keep than a small hotel, and the ones that finally do turn a profit only manage it by doing something almost nobody expects. Let's start with the price tag, because it's a lot smaller than you think, and that's exactly the trap. You can find islands in Canada and Belize for under $100,000. In the Bahamas, undeveloped cays regularly sell for $500,000 to a few million. At the very top of the market, the most expensive island ever sold was a Hawaiian island purchased by a technology billionaire for roughly $300 million in 2012, and even then, he only bought 98% of it. Somewhere between those two extremes sits the number most buyers actually pay, usually a few $1 million for something with a beach, a bit of flat land, and no infrastructure at all. Here's the number that changes almost every buyer's math, and almost nobody hears it before they sign anything. The listing price is typically only 40 to 60% of what you'll actually spend. Everything that makes an island livable, water, power, a dock, a road that isn't just sand, has to be built from scratch, shipped in by barge, and assembled by workers who also have to be housed and fed on site because there's nowhere else for them to sleep. A modest island home that would cost $300,000 to $500,000 on the mainland can run $500,000 to over $1 million once you factor in the logistics of building somewhere with no roads, no power grid, and no hardware store. Add the dock, the desalination plant, the generators, and the actual purchase price starts looking like a down payment on a much bigger project. And that's before you've dealt with the legal side. In the Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand, foreigners can't own island land outright at all. You lease it, sometimes for 50 to 99 years, through a corporate structure that has to be maintained and renewed. In parts of the South Pacific, it's the same story. You're not buying an island, you're renting one for a very long time and calling it ownership. Say you clear all of that, and the island is finally yours. Now you find out what it costs just to keep it standing. Annual operating costs for a modest developed island typically run somewhere between $84,000 and $310,000 a year, covering property tax, insurance, a caretaker, boat transport, and the endless maintenance that saltwater and tropical weather demand on anything made of metal or wood. A larger island with a full staff, guest houses, and a maintained dock can push past $500,000 a year, and that's before a single guest ever visits. Insurance alone in a hurricane zone can run 2 to 5% of the property's value every single year, because no insurer wants to be on the hook for a building that sits alone in open water during storm season. Then there's staffing, and staffing on an island is not like staffing anywhere else. You need housekeepers, groundskeepers, a boat captain, security, and someone who understands how to keep a desalination plant and a private power grid running without a hardware store or a repair technician anywhere nearby. High-end island operations can spend over $25,000 a month on staff alone. Every one of those people also needs to be transported to and from the island, housed somewhere, and kept supplied, which means your grocery bill and your payroll both come with a shipping surcharge attached. Here's the part that quietly breaks the whole equation for most owners. None of these costs care whether you're actually there. The generator needs fuel whether you visit 12 times a year or once. The caretaker gets paid whether you're on a plane to the island or on the other side of the planet. The insurance premium doesn't drop because you didn't feel like coming this year. You are paying every single month for the privilege of a piece of land existing, whether or not you ever set foot on it. So if the costs are relentless and mostly fixed, where does the money actually come from? For the owners who do make this work, it comes from 4 places, and the first one is the most obvious. Rental buyouts. The private island market has quietly built an entire industry around renting out the fantasy to people who can't afford to buy it. A full island buyout at the high end can run anywhere from $30,000 to over $100,000 a night, and at the very top of the market, well past $1 million for a week. That is real revenue, and it is the closest thing to the aeronautical fee and airport charges. It is the base business. The second layer, and the one almost nobody pictures, is real estate development. Some islands are never meant to be a single private residence at all. They're subdivided, with individual lots sold off to other wealthy buyers who build their own homes under a shared set of design rules, essentially creating a tiny, ultra-exclusive gated community that happens to be surrounded by ocean instead of a fence. The original owner keeps a portion for themselves and profits from every single lot sale around them, turning one piece of real estate into dozens. The third layer is licensing the island's use to outside productions and events, film shoots, fashion campaigns, private weddings, corporate retreats, each paying a flat day rate that has nothing to do with tourism at all. And the fourth, increasingly common in places with strict environmental protections, is leasing the surrounding waters and reef systems for conservation credits or research partnerships, turning the island's untouched ecology into a revenue line instead of just a cost center. Notice what all four of these have in common. None of them are living on an island. All of them are renting out scarcity in one form or another to people who want a taste of it without buying the whole thing. That's the real product. The island itself is just the delivery mechanism. Now here's where it goes wrong for almost everyone who tries this, and there's a story that captures it better than any spreadsheet could. In 2006, a group of high-profile investors, including a globally famous pop star and a founding member of one of the most successful rock bands in history, bought an 800-acre island in the Bahamas called Bonds Cay for around $16 million. The plan was ambitious and, on paper, completely reasonable. A boutique hotel, luxury apartments, private beaches, and an exclusive artist retreat where the investors themselves would spend part of the year. This wasn't a random purchase. These were sophisticated people with real money and a real vision. Nothing got built. Not the hotel, not the apartments, not the retreat. 20 years later, the island came back on the market, still mostly undeveloped, priced at $30 million. And to this day, it's unclear whether the original investors even sold it directly or simply walked away and let it sit. 20 years of property tax, insurance, and carrying costs on a piece of land that generated essentially nothing for people who had every resource imaginable to make it work. The island didn't fail because of a hurricane or a market crash. It failed the same way Ciudad Real Airport and Rolling Acres Mall failed. Someone assumed the demand and the execution would simply follow the ambition. It didn't. Building anything on an island multiplies every cost and every delay that exists on the mainland. And 20 years is what happens when nobody accounts for that going in. Compare that to a story that went the other way and started from an even less promising position. In 1978, a 28-year-old British entrepreneur named Richard Branson heard that a scattering of islands in the British Virgin Islands were for sale. He wasn't shopping for a retreat. He was shopping for somewhere to house musicians from his record label. He offered $150,000 for a scrubby, uninhabited 74-acre island with no water, no power, and no buildings. The owner threw him off the property for insulting him with such a low number. Branson kept saving, kept raising his offer, and eventually settled at $180,000 for the whole island. Then came the part almost nobody remembers. The local government's terms required him to build a functioning resort within 5 years or lose the rights entirely. Over the following 3 years, Branson spent roughly $10 million transforming scrubland into what is now Necker Island, an off-grid, solar and wind-powered luxury retreat that today rents out for buyouts starting around $100,000 a night and climbing well past $1 million for a full week. The island itself, once valued at essentially nothing, is now estimated to be worth around $100 million. Here's the actual lesson underneath that story, and it's easy to miss if you only remember the fairy tale ending. Branson didn't get lucky by buying an island cheaply. He got lucky by being legally forced to finish building something within 5 years, at a moment when he still had the money and motivation to do it. Bonds Cay had no such deadline, no forcing mechanism, and 20 years of good intentions produced nothing. The difference between a $180,000 island worth $100 million and a $16 million island still empty 2 decades later was never the price of admission. It was whether the thing that was promised on paper actually got built while the will and the capital to build it still existed. Now let's talk about the structural risk that runs underneath every single one of these numbers, because it's not the mortgage and it's not the staffing bill. It's isolation itself. An island has exactly one power source, one water source, and one way in or out, and all three of them can be destroyed by the same single event. Necker Island's own great house was destroyed once by fire in 2011, and then again by Hurricane Irma in 2017, a storm severe enough that Branson himself described it as devastation unlike anything he'd seen. Rebuilding after Irma took the better part of a year, during which the island earned nothing from a business model that depends entirely on people being able to physically get there. That's the trapdoor. A mainland hotel that loses its roof in a storm can still rent out half its rooms while repairs happen next door. An island that loses its dock, its desalination plant, or its single access point loses everything at once because there is no next door to fall back on. The same remoteness that makes the exclusivity valuable is the exact thing that makes the whole operation collapse instantly when one piece of infrastructure fails. You cannot diversify your way out of owning a single point of failure surrounded by water. Zoom out across this entire industry, and a pattern becomes obvious. The islands that generate real, sustainable income are almost never selling island life as the product. They're selling controlled scarcity, a room, a week, a lot of land, a film permit, priced at whatever the market will pay to briefly touch something almost nobody else can access at all. The islands that fail are the ones where the owner mistook the land itself for the business, assuming that owning something rare was the same thing as owning something profitable. Rarity and profitability are not the same asset. One is about what exists. The other is about what somebody is willing to pay for access to it. And building that access is the actual job. The part that Bonds K never did and Necker Island did almost by legal accident. So does owning a private island actually work as a business? The honest answer splits into the same two scenarios that show up again and again in assets like this. In the optimistic version, you inherit or create a forcing mechanism, a deadline, an obsession, a lease requirement that pushes you to actually finish building the access product, whatever form it takes, while the capital and motivation to do it are still there. The rental income, the lot sales, the licensing fees start compounding, the island's reputation builds on itself, and decades later the asset is worth many multiples of what you paid, the same way Necker Island quietly turned $180,000 into 9 figures. In the realistic bad version, the ambition stalls somewhere in year 2 or 3. The staffing costs and the insurance premiums and the property taxes keep arriving every single month, regardless of what's actually happening on the ground, while the hotel or the retreat or the residential community sits half-finished or never starts at all. 20 years later, you're the one relisting an island that's cost you a fortune and generated almost nothing, hoping the next buyer has better luck turning ambition into something that actually functions. Neither of those outcomes has much to do with how beautiful the beach is. A private island isn't really a piece of land with a house on it. It's a bet on whether someone, at some point, will actually finish building the reason other people are willing to pay to be there. The water and the sand were never the asset. The permission to stand on them and the discipline to finish building something worth paying for always were.